They say welfare destroyed black families, but what if I told you it started long before welfare even existed? From the moment they were stolen from Africa, the destruction of black families was set in motion, and that destruction did not end with slavery. If you've ever seen the viral video, How Welfare Destroyed Black Families, documentary, by Black Culture Unlocked, this video is going to take it to the next level. Today, we're covering everything they left out. This is not just about welfare, this is about how slavery, black codes, Jim Crow, housing discrimination, drugs, and mass incarceration have broken down black families for generations. From government-led drug epidemics that ravaged black communities to policies that punished addiction with prison time instead of help, every step was designed to destroy, divide, and conquer. Stay with me to the end, because I'm going to show you the bigger picture, and you'll never see black history the same way again. Greetings and welcome, history seekers. I'm Carolyn A. from GettingToTheRoots.com. Here, we're all about uncovering and celebrating your unique family history. Together, we'll explore and honor the stories that define us. Let's dive in. Slavery, the original attack on black families? Let's start with slavery, the first and most brutal system of family destruction. From the very beginning, enslaved mothers, fathers, and children were separated at auctions. Imagine being a mother, watching your child ripped from your arms, knowing you might never see them again. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a daily reality for black families for over 200 years. The trauma of these separations wasn't just emotional. It was generational. That trauma didn't just disappear when slavery ended. And that's where this story begins. Black codes and the new form of slavery? After slavery, people think black families were finally free. But freedom came with a new set of chains, black codes. These laws were designed to criminalize black life. Black men were arrested for things as small as vagrancy, which just means being unemployed. If you didn't have proof of work, you could be arrested and sent right back to the plantation as a convict laborer. The family was once again divided. The fathers sent to forced labor camps, while mothers and children struggled to survive on their own. Jim Crow, wealth destruction, and housing displacement? Then came Jim Crow, and with it, one of the biggest thefts of black wealth in history. Entire black communities were built after slavery, thriving black neighborhoods like Greenwood, also known as Black Wall Street. But white mobs destroyed them in a matter of days. Tulsa, Rosewood, Wilmington, the list goes on. The result? Families lost everything, homes, businesses, and wealth that could have been passed down to future generations. But the attack on black families didn't stop there. Highways were deliberately built through black neighborhoods, displacing thousands of families and destroying black-owned businesses. It wasn't just about building roads, it was about breaking up communities and destroying generational wealth. The welfare state and man in the house? Welfare programs began in the 1930s under the Social Security Act, but black families were largely excluded. These programs were designed to support white widows and their children, while black families were shut out due to discriminatory local policies. Many black families worked as sharecroppers and domestic laborers, jobs that did not qualify for assistance. This exclusion was intentional, reinforcing racial hierarchies. By the 1950s, as more black families migrated from rural areas to cities, they gained increased access to welfare benefits. Urban areas offered greater access to public assistance, and by the 1950s, about 30% of aid to families with dependent children recipients were non-white, including black families. But increased access came with increased surveillance. Welfare officials began to impose stricter oversight on black households, leading to one of the most notorious policies of the era, the man-in-the-house rule. By the 1960s, around 28% of families receiving aid to families with dependent children were black. With this rise came harsher control. The man-in-the-house rule allowed welfare caseworkers to conduct surprise inspections of homes. They searched for signs of a man living in the house, like men's shoes, clothing, or personal items. If they found any sign of a man, the family's welfare benefits were immediately cut off. While this rule was framed as race-neutral, it was disproportionately enforced in black households. The impact of this policy was devastating. Fathers were forced to leave their homes, so their children could continue receiving essential financial support. Staying in the home meant risking the loss of welfare benefits. But they were blamed for being absent, although their absence was the result of a system designed to force them out. By the late 1960s, nearly half of all families receiving aid to families with dependent children benefits were black. This increase was caused by systemic issues like unemployment, low wages, and economic hardship, all of which pushed families to seek support. But with support came control. It is essential to push back against the false narrative that welfare caused the destruction of black families. The reality is that racism, exploitation, and oppressive policies were already breaking apart black families for generations before welfare. Welfare programs did not create this problem. They simply reinforced it with policies like the man-in-the-house rule. Mass incarceration and drugs? When systemic strategies to marginalize black families proved insufficient, the war on drugs emerged as a powerful tool. As black empowerment movements like the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam inspired pride, discipline, and self-determination, a counter-strategy took shape, saturating black communities with drugs. During the peak of the Black Power era, heroin infiltrated neighborhoods, undermining the very foundations these movements sought to build. When the Nation of Islam experienced a resurgence in the 1980s, crack cocaine devastated black communities. This was no mere coincidence. While these movements strived to uplift black men and families, drugs were weaponized to weaken them, trapping them in cycles of addiction, arrest, and incarceration. Who brought the drugs in? It wasn't the man on the corner? Drugs were not being grown or manufactured in black neighborhoods. They were brought in by powerful forces far beyond the reach of the so-called street dealers. If the United States had the resources to send a man to the moon, surely they could figure out how heroin, cocaine, and crack were making their way into inner-city neighborhoods. The truth is, they knew. The question isn't how the drugs got there. It's who allowed it. Reports and investigations have revealed that large-scale drug trafficking was often linked to high-level figures, not just the person selling on the street corner. During the 1980s, for example, the Iran-Contra scandal exposed how the CIA was involved in facilitating drug trafficking in order to fund covert operations in Central America. But don't just take my word for it. Here's President Reagan himself addressing the nation on December 2, 1986, after the scandal broke.
Good afternoon. Since the outset of the controversy over our policy relating to Iran, I've done everything in my power to make all the facts concerning this matter known to the American people. I can appreciate why some of these things are difficult to comprehend, and you're entitled to have your questions answered. And that's why I've pledged to get to the bottom of this matter. And I have said earlier that I would welcome the appointment of an independent counsel to look into allegations of illegality in the sale of arms to Iran and the use of funds from these sales to assist the forces opposing the Sandinista government in Nicaragua.
While this was just one instance, it reflects a larger pattern where powerful actors were responsible for the entry of drugs into black communities. This wasn't just about drugs. It was about control. Black communities were already suffering from economic hardship, unemployment, and limited access to opportunity. Heroin, cocaine, and later crack cocaine didn't just appear in black communities. They were placed there. Crack, the cheapest and most addictive version of cocaine, flooded the streets in the 1980s. Unlike powder cocaine, crack was affordable, sold in small quantities, and designed to hook users on first use. Its low price wasn't random. It was a tactic to spread addiction in already struggling communities. At the same time, marijuana, once cheap and widely available, suddenly vanished. Supply dried up, and when it returned, the price had doubled or tripled. Street dealers didn't control supply chains or ports, so who had the power to manipulate the market like that? It wasn't the people on the corner. Right? I know I am right. Meanwhile, local news stations like Channel 7 in Detroit gave nightly reports on where to find drugs. They named parks, street corners, and abandoned buildings, essentially giving roadmaps to the drug trade. Instead of stopping it, they publicized it. Addiction spread. The real question is, who allowed it and why? Addiction or crime? How race shaped the response to drugs. Police launched raids, made arrests, and enforced mandatory minimums that targeted black communities with harsh crack cocaine penalties, while white powder cocaine users were treated with leniency. Instead of offering treatment or support, the government responded with punishment. Rehabilitation was replaced with incarceration, and care was replaced with crackdowns. The war on drugs disproportionately targeted black communities, leading to skyrocketing incarceration rates for black men in the 1980s and 1990s. Harsh mandatory minimum sentencing laws sent black men to prison for minor drug offenses, while white users were often given lighter sentences or sent to rehab. This systemic disparity tore fathers from their families, leaving mothers to raise children alone and creating a cycle of broken households. But let's be clear, this was not a story about poor choices or bad decisions. It was a story about power, control, and intentional design. Drugs did not just appear in black communities by accident. They were placed there. The powerful actors responsible for moving those drugs faced no consequences. Meanwhile, the people at the bottom, the users and low-level dealers, were criminalized, blamed, and punished. The opioid crisis was treated as a health issue with treatment and rehabilitation, while black addiction was criminalized, leading to incarceration. This reveals how race shaped America's response to addiction. The generational impact of trauma on black families? Mental health is a crucial part of this story that often goes unaddressed. From slavery to Jim Crow, from the war on drugs to mass incarceration, black communities have endured generational trauma with little to no mental health support. Unlike other communities offered counseling after traumatic events, black families were left to cope on their own. No therapy was offered to enslaved mothers whose children were sold away. No support was given to families when black fathers were forced into convict, labor camps, or when entire communities like Greenwood were destroyed. This generational trauma does not disappear on its own. It gets passed down. Studies have shown that trauma can impact families for generations, affecting how people process fear, stress, and adversity. Well, history seekers, that's a wrap. We invite you to watch the full playlist, The 400-Year Journey from Africa to America, to understand Black America's journey from Africa to today. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this, and share it to spread awareness. Thanks for watching. Peace and love.